Now, with it being Mother's Day and things, I was thinking about the fact that for pregnant women, there are really only two dates in the diary that matter when you're pregnant. There's the day that you're experiencing today. Can I get through today? I'm tired. This is hard. This is backache, etc. And then there's that day, the day when the baby's due to come. And those are the only two dates for a pregnant mother that need to be in their diary. Today, get through it, and that day that's coming. And actually, Martin Luther, a German monk in the 16th century, said the same thing about Christians. He said that for Christians, there are really only two dates in our diary that we need to worry about. Today, and then that day. The day that the Lord Jesus returns for his bride, the church. And today, we're going to be talking about the return of the King, which is a chance to think of Lord of the Rings. But the return of the King, the return of Jesus Christ, and the final judgment when all people, living and dead, will appear before the great judgment seat of Christ. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be looking specifically at one of the more contended and controversial, much disputed parts of the entire Bible and New Testament. In fact, the thing we're going to be looking at today has been caused to create multiple denominations around how they make sense of the text that we're going to be reading today. In fact, the text that we're going to be reading today is probably the reason why more churches don't preach through the book of Revelation, because it's confusing, hard to understand, and causes many people to come up with all sorts of strange systems to interpret things. That sound fun? We're going to be talking about the millennium. Cue Robbie Williams. Ooh. No, don't do that again. The millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus, as it's referenced in the book of Revelation. We have been going through this book, the final book of the Bible, for some weeks now. We've got 4 more weeks left of this series. And having gone through the middle section of the book, we now tilt towards the final few chapters. We saw that the centerpiece and the pinnacle of the book, with mirror verses either side, all pointing to this bit, we saw that the main point of the book is to tell people that there is a spiritual darkness, a spiritual enemy that's at work in trying to persecute, afflict, imprison, and kill the church. Certainly that was the case in John's day, and it's the case around much of the world, has been the case throughout much of history. There's a spiritual enemy, an accuser, who wants to steal, kill, and destroy, but that there is a lamb on the throne who reigns. That was in chapters 12 and 13 that we've looked at. We saw last week that using images of a land beast and a sea beast and a land beast, the Apostle John says that the enemy, the Satan, works to bring about coalitions in the world between political state power and religious church power. And throughout history, that's been the case, that state power and religious power have come together to form this formidable opponent for the church that have made Christians' lives hard. And that's the case in many parts of the world today, where governments and religion coalesce to oppress and afflict the church. That was in chapters 12 and 13. The chapters that come after that, John talks about this 7 bowls of punishment that get unleashed, which is like the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. It's recapitulations of trials and horrors that happen on the world. And it's a symbolic way of saying, using our pregnancy image, that human history is a series of contractions and times of peace. Contractions and peace, and that they build in intensity, build in severity until new life, until the return of Christ. That's what John seems to say. In chapter 17, I'll read this because we're going to reference it later. In chapter 17, we read a verse that marks the transition from the major middle section of the book into the final section of the book. And the phrase is, "Then I was carried away in the Spirit." And that's a phrase that John uses to indicate we're moving to another section of the vision. And this is what he says in John 17, verse 3. "Then he carried me away in the Spirit to a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, and pearls. She had a golden cup in her hand filled with everything detestable and with the impurities of her prostitution. On her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the detestable things of the earth. Then I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished." It's this horrendous image, a woman riding on top of a beast. And we're supposed to think of the land and sea beast that we saw before, religion and state power. In John's day, that was the Judaism of his day that was trying to persecute the church and was helping the Romans to get the Christians. This is woman riding on a beast. And I read that because we're going to come to a section of the book where we see someone else riding on a beast. In chapter 19, we read about the destruction of evil embodied in Babylon, this symbolic city that has always existed of these two powers, religious and state power. And in chapter 19, verse 1, we hear the cry of heaven, hallelujah, as evil is judged and thrown down. We then come in chapter 19, verse 11, to the main bulk of what we're going to be reading together now, as we consider the millennium or 1,000-year reign of Jesus. And it begins a moment where John is going to introduce us to 7 things that he sees in the vision. 7 times he's going to say, then I saw, and he describes something. Then I saw, and he describes something. We're going to look at the first 6 today and save the last 7th for later. But the first 6 things that he sees are about the destruction of evil and the coming of Jesus. The first 3 have to do with the destruction of the beast and the woman, or the land beast, the false prophet. The second 3 that he sees that we're going to look at is the destruction of Satan. But the major themes that I want you to kind of think about as we read this, let's put this table up on the screen, Chris, is these 4 things. We're going to get bogged down. If you don't feel bogged down already, it's going to get worse. We're going to get bogged down in the 1,000-year reign of Jesus and all that means. But the 4 things that John is really wanting to impress upon the church today is this: the victory of God over evil. No matter how evil and dark life feels, he says God will be victorious. Christ is Lord, the church will be vindicated, and the earth will be renewed. Those are the 4 big themes we're going to listen out for as we read this section, the 6 visions that John sees. Okay? You with me? Yes, thank you. No one. You with me? Yes, come on, let's do this. Chapter 19, verse 11. Then I saw heaven opened, and there was a white horse. And its rider was called Faithful and True. We've seen a woman riding on a beast. Now there's a rider on a white horse. Evil always tries to parody the truth. There will always be a woman riding on a beast for every Christ on a horse. But this rider is called Faithful and True. And with justice he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a fiery flame, and he had many crowns on his head. The Bible scholar Ian Paul points out that in Roman society, a wreath was a symbol of victory, but a crown was a symbol of authority. This rider isn't just victorious, as we've talked about wreaths before. He has authority to rule the nations. But unlike the kings of the earth who ruled with self-interest in mind, he rules in faithfulness and justice. He had a name written that no one knows except himself, and he wore a robe that had been dipped in blood. This is the first of our 4 themes, the vindication of the martyrs, the saints, people who have been killed. Jesus bears them on his clothes. His name was called the Word of God. The armies that were in heaven followed him on white horses, wearing pure white linen. You've got a rider on a horse and you've got an army following him, but it's an army dressed not in armor, like the demons and the locust scorpions that we saw several weeks ago. This army's armor is white linen, which is no protection at all. But of course they don't need protection, because their protection is their purity and their righteousness. And from this rider's, white linen, a sharp sword came from his mouth, so that he might strike the nations with it. He will rule the nations with an iron rod, and he will also trample the winepress of the fierce anger of God the Almighty. And he has a name written on his robe and on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This rider has a name written on his thigh that suggests and tells us explicitly he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And I want to point out that in Isaiah 63 in the Old Testament, we read a very similar scene where a rider or an individual goes out to trample the winepress of the fury of God. And in Isaiah 63, we read that it is God who's doing it. It says in Isaiah 63, why are your clothes red and your garments like one who treads a winepress? The answer, because I trampled the winepress alone and no one from the nations was with me. God says that he alone, no one was with him, trampled the winepress. Here we have Christ on a horse trampling the winepress. The thing that John's trying to relay here is that Christ, Jesus, is God himself. It's our second theme, the lordship of Christ over all things. Don't believe anything or any ideas if people ever tell you that the church came up with the divinity of Christ several hundred years after Jesus. Not true. John says right from the beginning, he is God himself. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he called out in a loud voice, saying to all the birds flying overhead, "Come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of military commanders, the flesh of the mighty, the flesh of horses and of their riders, the flesh of everyone, both free and slave, small and great." This feast that the birds of the air are called to, symbol of the Gentiles, but this feast, the nations that they're being called to, is a counterpart or a contrast to the wedding feast that's going to come. So you've got two feasts, one of judgment, one of celebration and delight to come. Then I saw an angel. Have I read that one? Yeah, I've read that one, sorry. And then I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider of the horse and against his army. But the beast was taken prisoner, and along with it the false prophet who had performed the signs in its presence. There's a scene of battle and armies coming together. Before there's even a fight, the beast is taken off as captive. The enemy is no match for God. He's carried away. He deceived those who accepted the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image with their signs. Both of them were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. The rest were killed with the sword that came from the mouth of the rider on the horse, and all the birds ate their fill of the flesh. See our final two themes, the victory of God and the renewal of the earth in this scene. So those are our first three, then I saw visions. If we put the table up, Chris, these are the four things that we said. This is four indications from those visions that draw these things out from the chapter that we've just looked at. The first three, then I saw, talk about the destruction of imperial and religious powers that oppose the church. The victims and the martyrs are getting their day in court. Christ is riding to victory. Justice is going to be done. And whereas in the first three visions we see the defeat of evil on earth, we then see in the next three visions that we're reminded that there's a bigger baddie behind these baddies. You know, the Apostle Paul says that we don't wage war against flesh and blood. Christians don't fight against people. If you're having an argument or a tough time with an individual, the Apostle Paul says you're never at war with the individual. There are principalities and powers, spiritual darkness, that pull the strings of people on the public scene. And so we've seen the destruction of evil empire, but then John pulls back and says, actually, there's a bigger baddie you really need to talk about that's behind all of those things. Do you remember the TV show 24 with Jack Bauer? Every season in episode 5 or 6, the baddie, or the person you thought was the baddie, the main villain, would be defeated. But then you'd realize, oh wait, it's only hour 6, there's 18 hours left to go. Oh, there must be a bigger baddie behind them all. And that's what we see here. We look at the world stage and we see evil dictators throughout history. We see people suffering injustice and violence, and we think that's a problem. But John says there's a bigger baddie behind them, and that's what we're going to read about in chapter 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key to the abyss, a word that means bottomless, a place associated with the origins of evil. I saw an angel holding the key to the abyss, and he had a great chain in his hand. This angel seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, bound him for 1,000 years, and he threw him into the abyss, closed it, and put a seal on it, so that he would no longer deceive the nations until the 1,000 years were completed. After that, he must be released for a short time. In the book of 2 Peter in the New Testament, in chapter 2, we read that God put the demons in chains until judgment time. It's a common reality that's described in Peter and John here. This idea in their world that a criminal or someone who'd done wrong would be put in chains. Their power would be limited. They'd be put under house arrest until the day of their hearing in court, where their final judgment would be unveiled for everybody to see. In Colossians 2, we're told that when Jesus died on the cross, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and disgraced them publicly. Jesus on the cross was disgracing Satan and his hordes. Which leads some scholars to suggest that what we've just read, what we're reading about here with Satan being bound for 1,000 years and then released for a short time after the 1,000 years, what we've just read there, some scholars suggest, is that Satan, having been defeated and humiliated at the cross, has now, for a short time, we're told, for a short time, has been released. And during this period of short time, he's permitted to accuse the church and even try to kill Christians. And John calls it a short time. And we've seen throughout Revelation that the numbers, we believe, are best to be understood symbolically. Elsewhere, this short time, John's called it 3.5 years, or he's called it 42 months, or he's called it a time times and half a time, which to us is very confusing, but John didn't explain it, meaning his readers would have understood exactly what he's talking about. What he's saying is that since the death and resurrection of Jesus, until Jesus comes back again, we are in this short time, this period where the Satan will accuse the church. But make no mistake, he has been bound, and his power is limited. We're told that his power is limited such that he cannot deceive the nations any longer. Which means he cannot prevent the nations of the world coming to faith in God and responding to the gospel. That's what John's saying here. We'll carry on. Then I saw, it's our sixth, it's our fifth. Glad someone's in charge. Then I saw thrones and people seated on the thrones, and they were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who'd been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or its image and who had not accepted the mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. A big theme, the saints, the martyrs have been vindicated. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. It's pretty clear, isn't it? 1,000 years, a millennium period of time. It's a number or a symbol that appears only here in the New Testament, and yet it's been the source of many interpretations and much debate throughout Christian history. What exactly is John referring to? When is this 1,000-year period? Is it now? Is it in the future? Has it already happened? Somebody help me out here is what John, not what John's saying he knew, but what the rest of the church since John have said, what was this about? So today, I'm going to give us just 3 common interpretations and understandings of this text. And after today, if you're interested in finding out more, in our midweek email, we're going to send out links to a 2.5-hour discussion between 3 individuals who hold each of these viewpoints and they debate it together. So if this is something that really is of interest to you, you can go there in the midweek email. If you've got more questions after that, please come and see me and I'll refer you to someone else. We've also got some booklets that we're going to give out about this next week as well. So, what is John talking about? When is it going to happen? Somebody make sense of this for me, please. The 3 main views that people in the history of the church have held around this view are as follows. Number 1, there is a view that's become called premillennialism. Everybody say premillennialism. There we go. Premillennialism. And it refers to millennial, the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. And what this belief holds is that Jesus will come back before a 1,000-year period where he will reign on the earth. In this scheme and way of understanding the text, they believe that after Jesus' death and resurrection, the church entered a period of time known as the tribulation or the trouble. John says it in chapter 1 of Revelation that I'm a brother in the tribulation. That word tribulation just means trouble. And this system believes that we're living in a period of trouble and tribulation, and that actually the closer we get to the return of Christ, the harder and harder it's going to be for Christians to follow Jesus, because there'll be more and more trouble and tribulation. But there will come a moment in history when Jesus returns. And at that point, there will be a resurrection, what John calls the first resurrection. There'll be a resurrection of believers who will be raised and will reign with Jesus on the earth for a literal 1,000-year period of time. Jesus will be raised, Christians will be raised with him. They will then reign in some geographic part of the world for 1,000 years, whilst there are also non-Christian kingdoms around at the same time. Then at the end, there will be a last judgment. God will recreate the world, and then we'll go on into eternity. That's premillennialism, that Jesus will come back before the millennium, the 1,000-year reign. That's taking quite a literalistic understanding of the text. The second one, however, is called postmillennialism, which, you guessed it, has to do with the 1,000-year reign of Christ and saying that Jesus will return after the 1,000 years. This system holds that after Jesus' death and resurrection, we entered a period of time known as the church age. And as the church age continues, there will begin 1,000 years. Maybe we're in it now, some believe we do. Maybe it's to come, some believe it hasn't yet come. But there will come a literal, often literal, sometimes symbolic, but often literal 1,000-year period where the church will grow in authority and influence around the world such that we can say we are reigning with Christ. Most believe that this is a symbolic reigning with Christ, that Christ doesn't appear bodily, but instead comes in the second coming when he'll also enact the second and final judgment. There'll be a resurrection of believers and non-believers together. There'll be a creation of new heavens and a new earth, and then we'll go on into eternity. That's post-millennialism. It happens after the millennial reign happens after the coming of Christ. The coming of Christ comes after. Right. Then the third, in case you're not confused, if I do things like that, it makes you even more confused, doesn't it? Don't trip up on your words. Don't do that. I'm already struggling to follow you. But the third point of view is called amillennialism. In Greek refers to a negative form. So atheist is like non-belief in God. Amillennial has to do with this idea that the millennium is a symbolic period of time. It may be 1,000 years, it may be longer than 1,000 years, but it's a symbolic period of time. That from the time that Jesus died and rose, we entered the church age, which is also synonymous to the millennium, the period of time where Christians are reigning with Christ. And actually what we read in our text, they would make sense of the first resurrection to mean that those who die as martyrs reign spiritually, they're resurrected and they reign spiritually with Jesus during this period of time. That we are in the millennium now. And it's not a millennium, it's just the church age, or it's what John calls a short time, or 3.5 years, etc. After, and there will come a time in history during this period where Christ will return. There will be a second coming. The King will come back. And then there'll be a resurrection of believers and unbelievers. There'll be creation of the new heavens and the new earth. And then we'll go on to eternity after the final judgment. Those are the three views: premillennialism, postmillennialism, and amillennialism. And Christians throughout history and today hold those three views. Very clever, Bible-loving Christians hold those three views. You can hold any one of those three views and have plenty of very bright Christian brothers and sisters throughout history on your team, okay? So there's no kind of problem with holding any one of those views. There is a fourth view, which is a slight kind of twist on the first one, premillennialism. It's called dispensational premillennialism, if you want to have that for breakfast. But that viewpoint, it's a viewpoint that says that history has been separated into different dispensations, and that after this be at a specific time, we'll be able to plot the signs and see exactly when Jesus is coming back. This period of this scheme of theology was devised in 1830. And was made popular by a Christian paperback series called Left Behind. If you haven't heard that before, don't worry. But because it's such a historically novel, it only came about in 1830, and because there's nothing else in the rest of the Bible that suggests we should expect what this view holds to be true, it's not a view that we would encourage anybody to hold or to take too seriously. My understanding, the elders of the church's understanding, the movement that we're part of's understanding, largely is that we are living now in the millennium reign of Christ. We are, if you like, amillennialists. We read this symbolically. It's a number that reflects the reality that we're living through now until Jesus returns and enacts a final judgment. As I said, we'll send out resources about this. There are challenges and inconsistencies in some of the ways that people understand these texts for all three of the views that we've talked about. There's no perfect scheme or system, okay? The danger of premillennialism that we've talked about, the danger of that is that you have an overly cynical attitude towards history. You think, oh, it's just all going to hell in a handbasket. Or you have an overly cynical view of evangelism and sharing the gospel. Oh, people won't become Christians because, we're living through the millennium. We're living through a period of tribulation where people won't come to Christ. The danger of the other two viewpoints is that there's perhaps an overly triumphalistic, we can do it, the church is going to dominate the world point of view. And when it comes to evangelism, there's a danger that says, oh, God will do it, we don't need to worry about it. So there's dangers to all three of those views, but those, broadly speaking, are the three views. That is the millennium. If you're still with me, well done. If you've checked out, it's time to check back in because we can put that one to bed. We'll move on. And as I said, if you've got any questions, come and speak to me afterwards. Let's move on from chapter 20 for the final few verses, the last visions, things that John saw. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. This is a reference to a battle scene in the book of Ezekiel. Their number is like the sand on the sea. They come up from across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the encampment of the saints, the beloved city. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed them. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. The theme of the victory of God. Then I saw a great white throne and one seated on it. Earth and heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. I also saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works by what was written in the books. Then the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. Each one was judged according to their works. Death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Those are our final two themes. Evil is judged, the earth is renewed. So for all of its complexity about millenniums and dates and dragons and beasts, these four themes on this table, Chris, that get drawn out across both chapters, that God reigns over evil, that God is going to have a victory over evil. Jesus reigns. The church, the martyrs, those who've been killed for following Christ will be vindicated, and the whole earth will be renewed. I used to play a lot of chess with, I had an old Hungarian neighbor, and we would meet together often for palinka, this Hungarian spirit, coffee, some food, and chess. He was very good at chess, and I'm not very good at chess because I'm too impulsive. Oh, just take that. Oh, he's beating me again. And he would often, when we played chess, I would quickly find myself on the back foot, dancing around the chessboard, trying to evade his attempts to beat me. And often, our games of chess would look like this. I would move, he would move and say, check. And I'd go, oh, crumbs, and I would move, and then he'd move again and say, check. And I'd move again, check. And he would just keep moving me around the board, saying, check, getting me as close as he could to victory. But every so often, I would manage to sneak a pawn across the enemy lines and get it to the end of the board. And the pawn would take on magic powers and become a queen. And the tables would be turned. And I would soon be able to move a piece and say to him, not check, but checkmate. For all of his checks, they meant nothing. Because what really matters in a game of chess isn't how many times you check the opponent. What matters is that one phrase, checkmate, and then you win. And you see, in Christian history and throughout the church, the enemy thinks he's got the church on the ropes. Check, check. Christians in the Middle East having their heads cut off by ISIS, as we looked at a few weeks ago. Feels like that sometimes. A few weeks ago. ISIS think they win. Check, says evil. Or Christians in India at the moment whose churches are being burnt down and pastors are being imprisoned. The enemy goes, check. He thinks he's got the church on the ropes. In countries like the West, where opposition to the gospel is being turned up in many parts, where Christians find it harder to share their faith, or where you come out as a Christian, you tell your family, I believe in God, and they mock you and ridicule you for it. It's as though sometimes you can hear the enemy whisper in your ear, check, I've got you on the ropes. John writes Revelation to say to the church, it doesn't matter how many times the enemy says check to the church. Christ is coming. And when Christ comes, he will say checkmate. And all of the hard work of the enemy to try to destroy the church will be as of nothing, because Christ will take his place on the throne. In all of the stuff that we've looked at today, in the millennial trying to discern and just kind of think about when Jesus is going to return, there's one important Bible passage I want to leave us with from Mark chapter 13, where Jesus says this to his followers. He says, listen, concerning that day or hour, no one knows. Neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. No one knows when Jesus is coming back. So don't believe someone on YouTube if they tell you they know when he's coming back. True story, that happens most weeks on YouTube. Don't believe them. It's happened throughout history. People have said, oh, I've discerned the signs of the times. Because of this war or that king or this ruler, he's coming back. Jesus says, don't listen to them. And actually, in Thessalonians 5, the Apostle Paul says that Christ, when he comes, will come like a thief in the night. You don't need to waste your time worrying, obsessing about exactly when Jesus is coming back. He's coming like a thief when you're not expecting it. You know, I don't lay awake at night trying to predict when a thief is coming to rob my house. Instead, I just lock the doors and go to sleep. Instead, what I do is I make sure I steward my property well by locking it, and then I sleep carefully. Well, it's the same for the church. We don't need to worry about when Jesus is coming. He'll come suddenly. Our job is to steward, look after what he's given us, your gifts, your talents, the resources that he's given you. You need to steward them carefully, knowing that he will come. So on the one hand, we don't need to obsess and predict, but Jesus ends what we said. It ends what he says here to his followers by saying, no one knows when I'm coming back, but watch, be alert, for you don't know when the time is coming. For the Christian, we mustn't obsessively look into these things, but neither must we be complacent and forget that Jesus is coming back. He is returning. We should expect opposition. We should expect the pains of labor. We should expect contractions. We should expect times of challenge and times of ease. We should expect the enemy to say, check, check, check. But we should also live with the expectation that Christ is coming, when the labor pains will end, when new life, the new resurrection will come, and the enemy will hear those words, checkmate.